Greetings to you all, fellow travelers. This is Krotnip welcoming you all back to the logbook of a simple Lindwurm traveler. Today we are diving back to the introduction series Welcome to Lindwurm, and today we are finally going to take a look at my favorite faction in all of Warcrow and the faction that most of the content on this channel is all about, the Northern Tribes. Welcome all to a tour through the North. Today I'm looking to give all of you a short introductory look at the Northern Tribes faction of Warcrow. I'm going to be breaking this coverage down into three different subfacets. Firstly, we are going to be taking a look at the backstory of the Northern Tribes. Then we are going to cover some of the basic aesthetics of the faction's models. And lastly, we are going to discuss the Northern Tribes as an army in the war game of Warcrow. This information is obviously something that's highly geared towards potential future new Northern Tribes players. But I'm hoping that people that are looking to play other factions and those people who are simply interested in the excellently crafted world of Lindwurm that Korvuspelli has provided us with will also find this presentation to be interesting. As you can see from the images already shown, I'm looking to use a lot more Korvuspelli provided stuff as visualizations for today's presentation, and I'm really grateful for Korvuspelli for a chance to do so. Hopefully this artwork and some model pictures from the company itself will help immerse all of you on this journey through the North. I have a sneaking suspicion that this episode may run quite long, so without further delay, let's get to the backstory of the Northern Tribes themselves. As the name suggests, the Northern Tribes inhabit the northernmost territories of Lindwurm. The orcs of this world have roamed the Boreal lands, the northernmost continent, from time immemorial, while the Varangs were displaced there by the civil war that destroyed the great elven empire of Gae Assail. The story more or less goes that the warring elven factions were looking to press other cultures and nations of Lindwurm into service as cannon fodder essentially in their fighting. And when the elves came for the Varangs didn't want to join the elves' war. So those who could escape to their new colonies in the Boreal lands, and those who were left behind to cover their retreat were cut down by the elves who didn't want the Varangs joining the other side of the conflict. And this sorrowful history of the Varangs is in part reflected in their current culture and their attitude towards, for example, the elves of Lindwurm. The Boreal lands themselves are characterized in the backstory as being called inhospitable and dangerous lands, where it's easy to fall prey to the elements or the many dangerous beasts that wander the lands, and the Varangs and the orcs have had to struggle to eke out a living here for centuries. Let's next talk about the backstory of the orcs specifically. The source material explains to us that the orcs of Lindwurm are powerful, cunning and fierce hunters who believe themselves to be the apex predators of the world that surrounds them. This means that while the orcs have absolutely no qualms about shedding blood and killing when that's necessary, whether that be for hunting, for survival and food, or in the context of war in order to conquer and provide for their tribe, the orcs feel that unnecessary bloodshed is unnatural and they abhor all types of cruelty towards those who they slay. While other cultures of the land may see the orcs as feral and brutal and somehow beast-like, the orcs themselves have a very strict sense of duty towards all other living beings. And if an orc, for example, vanquishes a worthy opponent in combat, and they subsequently proceed to consume parts of their slain foe, this is not an act of a mindless and ferocious beast looking to sate its hunger, but an act of honoring the fallen and trying to absorb some of their strength so that the orc warrior may be even more powerful going forward. The Orcish society seems to be very pragmatic in all of its facets. The orcs value strength at arms and skill at hunting and leadership, but at the same time they do acknowledge that there is a life cycle to everything and to everyone, and honoring this life cycle is part of accepting the world as it is. The orcs feel that it's not a good idea to obsess over the past or worry too much about the future, but rather it's important to live right in the here and the now. So one could say in a way that the orcs are very big into this whole mindfulness thing. The backstory tells us that orcs rarely live to be very old. If I remember correctly, 50 years is said to be an old age for an orc. Unlike other species of Lindwurm, the orcs seem to be constantly growing in muscular mass and strength as they become older, but after a certain point, a prime of their lives, this increased strength and size comes at the cost of their dexterity and their fine motor skills and their speed, which means that they become lumbering behemoths of a creature, but they are no longer at the peak of their physical capabilities when everything is summed up together. While the orcs gain the position of leadership in a tribe via personal combat, it's very important that the successful contender does not actually kill the previous leader, since doing so would deny access to the experience and the wisdom of the old leader to the entire tribe. And likewise, it's in good form for the defeated former leader to assume this position of a wise elder who can tutor the young, because this is simply another stage in the life cycle of an orc. This pragmatism even flows into how the orcs reproduce, since any two members of the tribe are free to have children together if they so choose, and any offspring produced will be tutored and taken care of by the entirety of the tribe. The orcs of Lindwurm believe that their spirits will be reborn in one way or another back into the circle of life. Some may be reborn as orcs or other living beings. Others might be reborn as natural phenomena, rock formations, or pretty much anything of natural origin. And some of the orcs, especially the evokers, are even capable of remembering their past lives, or at least some of them. This strong feeling of purpose and the continuity of the circle of life means that death holds little fear for the orcs, who see it as a important and natural state of being, and something that all living beings, and to a lesser extent non-living beings, also have to face at some point. So the orcs don't necessarily fear death itself, but rather they fear losing themselves and losing their sense of purpose due to becoming consumed by greed or hungriness for power, or getting maddened to a point where they are just brutal killers with no sense of honor and morality and so forth. So this is the orc society in the world of Lindwurm, a culture of noble hunters who are powerful, brutal, yes, but also very cognizant of their position in the world and very respectful towards the natural order of things. The other northern tribe that makes up the northern tribes in the faction is the Varangs. As already stated, the Varangs were pushed to the Boreal lands by the Elven Civil War an eon ago, and this must have had an impact on the way that the Varang society of the present day works. From what I can understand, the current day Varang culture seems to be a tough and very martial society where personal honor and personal prowess are highly valued, and many conflicts, whether they be social, justice related, or pretty much anything else, are solved through violence if one side is not willing to give in. Unlike the orcs, the Varangs also hold customs like slavery, and they also enjoy torturing their enemies, especially hated enemies such as the elves. The Varangs who take up slaves are expected to care for them, but at the same time the slaves live in squalid conditions, and they are made to work under harsh conditions. So being enslaved by Varangs is often seen as a terrible fate, where orcs might simply slay or let their enemies flee once the battle is done. The Varangs seek to enslave as many of their enemies as possible. And even when the enemy ransoms some of their prisoners back, the Varangs are known to mutilate their enemies so that they cannot stand against the Varangs in future combat, for example amputating fingers from archers and stuff like this. While the orcs are pure hunters, the Varangs also are farmers who farm the land, and it would also seem that they ply their trades outside the Boreal lands also. It seems that the hegemon, that is the leader of the hegemon of Emperor Ceck, has a guard that's made up of Varang warriors, and we see isolated Varangs and Varang, I would imagine, societies or groups living outside the Boreal lands also. The unique aspect of the Varang culture in the world of Lindwurm is their heavy emphasis on tattoos. And it would appear that these magical images depict to some extent the life story of the Varangs who adorn their bodies with these images, and many of the tattoos seem to have magical properties also. The most important tattoo for each Varang seems to be that of their totem animal, and this animal is revealed to each Varang in a ceremony in which they reach their maturity and become full-fledged members of the tribe. Some Varangs are not only capable of calling to the strength of their totem animal when in need, but they are actually capable of partially or in some rare cases totally shape-shifting into their totem creatures. We see this aspect on the tabletop in units like the Varang Skin Changers or Alvar the Ice Bear, and many of the models have tattoo-related special abilities on them also. Living in the resource-poor boreal lands has meant that especially during difficult times, the orcs and the Varangs have had to battle each other for the slim pickings of the world around them. But at the same time, it would seem that despite this at times uneasy coexistence, no true and lasting hatred has festered between the two cultures, and during the better times when the resources around them have not been so sparse, they have lived and let the others live instead of seeking to actively fight one another. Lately, the Wrathmane Alborg began to improve the relations between his tribe and those of the nearby Varangs by originally saving Hilgard Whitestone, the daughter of Alvard Icebear. And actually, it was Hilgard who then began to visit Alborg's tribe and learn their language and their customs. And in due time, this relationship of mutual curiosity and led to friendship that led to the uniting of the tribes. At least as in uniting to fight for a common goal. Because when Alborg started to feel that the fog that was creeping down from the extreme north was an existential threat to his people, and he put forward the plan to lead orcs to the southern lands, Alvard Icebear led his Varangs together with his brother in arms on this quest. Now, in the present day of the history, in the history of Lindwurm, the orcs and the Varangs are an invading army that has descended from the north and taken some lands from the Mount Haven dwarves and the feudals, and it's expected that they will continue their advances towards the southern lands, since Alborg is looking to place as much distance between himself and his people and the fog seeping down from the north as possible. Okay, now we have a basic level understanding of how the tribes got to where they are at the moment. Next, let's take a quick look at the aesthetics of the models that you will be fielding should you choose to play the Northern Tribes in Warcrow. Let's start by taking a look at some of the basic elements that make up the orcs, the tribal hunters of this faction. I have chosen two different models here as our examples. On the top left there we have a battle scarred, and here on the lower right we have a prime warrior. Neither of these is a basic warrior of the faction, but most of what I'm looking to show you can be evident from these models. So let's take a quick look at some of the things that we can see here. Firstly, as you can see, the orcs of Lindwurm are very heavily built, and it would seem that older the orc, the more heavier they become. And as such, the orc frames are very muscular, and usually there is quite a decent amount of probably to be green painted skin on the show. The models seem to have a good mix of different genders, and it's usually the facial features that give the best indication on the background of the orc and whether they are, for example, male or female or maybe something else. As befits a group of hunters. The orcs are very big on adorning themselves with bones taken from what I would imagine are some of the great beasts of the boreal lands. Some of these bones are used as armor, as you can see, for example, on the battle scarred over there, while others are simply decorative, as is the case with some of the horns on the back of our Prime Warrior here. And it would seem that the weapon hilts of the orcs are pretty much exclusively made from bone also. The weaponry of the orcs usually takes a form of scimitar-like blades, but there are also some punching claws and some clubs that we can see. The clubs are often of bone or wood, and they are then reinforced with, for example, teeth or metal pieces, as is the case with the battle scarred over here. The armor that the orcs wear is quite a mix of stuff. As already stated, there is a lot of bone that's also used to double as armor. And while the orcs do have some pieces of plate mail, usually on their shoulders or on their wrists, they are often covered by the set bones, so we don't see all that many pieces of plate on them. Some orcs wear scale armor, especially on skirts, and some on their torsos already. But the most common type of armor is what I researched to be something of a lamellar type. Take a look at an orc hunter model and you see what I mean. These two examples don't actually show the armor type that's most common on the orc models themselves. Most of the orcs fight bareheaded, EA they don't carry helmets, but the battle scar do actually have metal helmets and some of the characters have bone helmets on them, but most of the orc warriors are fighting without helmet at all. Okay, let's next take a look at the Varangs, and as you can see from the first glance, there are going to be some similarities, but also some clear differences. If we take a look at the basic features of the Varangs, we see an interesting mix of elf-like features, but also something that's larger than most of the humans and also often quite muscular. In the backstory, it would seem to be suggested that the elves of Lindwurm have been created or evolved from the Varangs, so this linkage on how the Varangs look a bit elven is to be expected, even though they are much more muscular, they are taller, and they are more feral looking also. If you are looking to follow more or less the studio and the backstory scheme, then the Varang skin is also of very distinct color. The weaponry of the Varangs is quite different from the orcs. We don't see maces or scimitar-like blades at all, at least from what I have seen so far, but rather the Varangs seem to favor leafy style blades on, for example, their spears. Most models carry short swords as their backup weapons, and then we have some axes and other larger weapons present also. We do need to remember, however, that what we see when it comes to the Varangs is tilted towards characters and also specialist type troops, since we don't actually see all that many frontline Varang warriors, at least in the units released so far. While the orc models have a lot of bone on them, the Varangs usually do not, but what the Varangs instead have more than the orcs is furs on their models. Yes, orc models often have some pieces of fur on them, but the Varangs tend to have a lot more of fur. I could simplify this by saying that everything that's bone on the orcs is fur on the Varangs. The armor types that one sees on the Varangs seem to be more or less of the same types as the orcs tend to use, but the models that we have access to so far tend to be either skirmishers, ranged infantry, or berserker type models, so they are pretty light on armor all in all. The Varang footwear is very distinct, where the orcs wear very heavy looking, often iron shod boots. The Varangs seem to be wearing softer and more practical footwear. And this leads us to some example pictures of my models, and in this instance as examples for the possibilities of conversions when it comes to fielding the forces of the northern tribes. Here on the top, the two pictures are an Aalborg model and a Weissmain model that have simply had their hands swapped between them, and then some small additional work done on the model so that I was able to create my own personalized Wrathmane model and a Contender model. As you can see, easy to effect changes like this are something that the orc models are extremely good recipients of. The orcs being heavily built and not so beautiful of their features, at least in the traditional sense, means that you can get away with a bit more choppy work when it comes to replacing part and stuff like this. Another thing that's very easy to use to mask the effects of conversion is painting the skin on one's models. Here on the lower left is a extra orc evoker that I had lying around that I converted into a Varang character. The orcs and the Varangs are physically quite different from one another, so pulling off stuff like this isn't probably going to be useful all that often, but if and when one chooses to mix the parts, one can hide this fact by painting the skin in a different color and you're pretty much good to go. The fact that the northern tribes are very pragmatic raiders and traders means that they will make use of any equipment that they see as usable for their purposes, and I think this opens up the possibility of kit bashing your models quite extensively. As long as majority of the model is Corvus Belli stuff, then you should be good to go. Here's another one of my Varang characters that's based on a Tundra Marauder model, and I have simply used a spearhead from the Ice Archer set and then some bits and pieces I had lying around to create the rest of his equipment. This stuff here isn't supposed to be a showcase of look at me go, look how great I am, but rather a hey look guys, if I can do this, pretty much anyone can. I don't feel that I am particularly good at converting, and I'm especially not much of a painter, but if I can get decent enough results, I think you all can do at least as well as I. When it comes to working with the material, I really haven't had much problems. I think I have had a single model break from a place that I wasn't looking to break when I was converting my stuff, and I was easily able to glue everything back together in that instance also, and I don't think the model shows any damage after So these things are pretty nice and decent to work with. So it's really only your imagination and your access to bits and pieces that should be standing in the way of you converting your own models for the stuff that doesn't have a Corvus Belli provided model, or if you're looking to simply spice your models up so that they are unique to you, then go ahead. Alright, let's get to the last part of this presentation and let's talk about the Northern Tribes as a Warcrow army. The first thing that I want to stress before going any further is the fact that we are indeed talking about the Northern Tribes, not a Northern Tribe. If you feel that you are, as a prospective Northern Tribes player, more drawn towards the Varang side or the Orc side of the faction, I think that's very natural and that's something that most of us feel, I think. But at the same time, while playing only Orcs or only Varangs is technically possible now that most of the models are out, I strongly recommend against this if you have any aspirations of trying to do well in a competitive environment. And this is because the faction has clearly been designed as a single faction with two cultures in it, rather than as two sub-factions that could be played together. What I mean by this is quite clearly presented in an example that I have prepared for you here below. This is a table that I made of the infantry units that the faction of Northern Tribes has access to as of right now. We have 2 Orc units and 3 Varang units. The Orc infantry units are the Orc Hunters and the Battle Scarred, and I would classify both of these as line infantry units. That is, units that are intended to advance towards the enemy, engage them at close range, and then fight over the possession of objectives, for example. The 3 Varang units, on the other hand, fulfill more specialist duties. The Skin Changers are a shock infantry unit that's usually dedicated into inflicting damage, but they lack the conquest value required to actually contest objectives. The Tundra Marauders are a skirmisher type unit that can technically be pressed into service as line infantry if necessary, but they aren't as well equipped for it as the Orc Hunters, let alone the Battle Scarred, and the Ice Archers are a ranged infantry unit. So if you choose to play only Orcs, then you lose access to these more specialized infantry units, and then again if you choose to only play Varangs, then you will be inefficient when it comes to line infantry fieldage. So I would strongly suggest mixing and matching the two cultures together, and sooner or later you will start to feel that okay, I want to play mostly Varangs with some Orc help, or mostly Orcs with some Varang help, or maybe a 50-50 mix. I have seen some brave souls who are simply soldiering on with only one side of the equation, and I have tried playing some Orcs only myself, but I always tend to come back to fielding both Orcs and Varangs in some type of mix. Okay, let's next take a look at some of what I perceive to be the strengths of the Northern Tribes faction on the tabletop. Firstly, our roster is made up of extremely offensively capable units. Most of the Orc and Varang units can usually go toe-to-toe with their opposing numbers, especially if they are the ones who get to initiate the hostilities. And this is a extremely powerful thing. While casualties and damage may not be the most important way of winning a game of Warcrow, being able to achieve attrition supremacy over your opponent can facilitate other goals that help you win the game, and they can be used to pressure your opponent. So having a roster of units that are capable of inflicting damage when given the chance to do so can be a really nice and good thing to have. The Northern Tribes models also tend to be quite tough on average, especially the characters when we compare them to some more puny factions like the Hegemony or the Siennan Elves. But this sturdiness doesn't so much come from a good defense roll usually, but rather it comes from the wounds attribute and or the amount of models in the unit. And this means that the toughness of the Northern Tribes units is a finite resource that the enemy can chew through given enough time, attacks, and the right types of attacks to do so. The Northern Tribes are also home to an excellent selection of both ambushers and scouts. Maneuvering for position is quite activation intensive and thus resource intensive in the game of Warcrow, so units that can jump into the battle the midway and don't have to spend the activations to move into position can be extremely strong, and our forces have excellent access to such units. These units can be used to block the lines if there is a risk of an enemy breakthrough, for example, or they can be used to harass, threaten, or even exploit the vulnerabilities of the enemy force. And my experience is that opponents playing against me have often felt very threatened by the stuff that I hadn't deployed at the beginning of the game, and that gave me the advantage in many instances. The Northern Tribes faction also incorporates a surprisingly vast array of different types of units, which actually opens up quite interesting list construction options. And at least as of right now, I don't feel that there is a definite way of building strong Northern Tribes lists, but rather there are several different ways that you can approach the subject, and this hopefully will keep our opponents guessing long into the future. I also find that the tactical elements that make up the Northern Tribes company are usually highly autonomous once on the battlefield. I usually find myself creating unit plus character type combinations that can work unsupported extremely well. Obviously, there are cross-unit synergies that one needs to leverage in order to get the most mileage out of one's troops, but at the same time, these troops can be entrusted to do their thing alone, and then you can focus on some other part of the battlefield with the other units working under your command. The Northern Tribes units also seem to have a high tendency towards switches and other abilities that inflict various negative states on the enemy, the disarmed and vulnerable being the chief among them, but also there is some frightened and some slowed states to pass around. And with the rules update 1.5 making effectively all the states more powerful, this is definitely a strength of the faction going forward. Well, nobody is perfect, not even our beloved Northern Tribes, so let's next take a look at some of the things that the Northern Tribes aren't so great at. Let's look at some of the limitations of this faction on the tabletop. Firstly, the Northern Tribes are not a ranged army per se. They do have some solid ranged options with the release of the Ice Archers and Celica, and these can both drive up enemy casualties and cause some crowd control issues with the enemy force. But at the same time, the northern tribes aren't going to be shooting off their tables from their opponents from the table. So that's something that we need to be cognizant of. At the same time, I have a strong feeling that Warcrow isn't a very ranged heavy game, so this is a limitation that we can easily live with. What I find to be more impactful is our faction's media core access to command tokens. Command tokens are useful for trying to secure the initiative at the beginning of the game, and they are also used to fuel the command skills that many of our units have. And with the fact that most of the Northern Tribes characters are only bringing a single command token to the table, the total tends to be a bit lackluster. And this can hurt us when it's the time to roll for initiative, and it can also limit the times that we can activate some of our more powerful and meaningful command skills. At the same time, I'm not going to go as far as to say that the Northern Tribes have a low access to command tokens. From what we have seen so far, it's pretty close to what the pre-release Scions have, and it's actually a bit more than what the Siennan have access to, and it's rather the hegemony that gets the upper hand on us in this regard. Another core limitation of our faction seems to be a lowish average conquest value, which means that the Northern Tribes units usually have to escort the defenders out of the objectives that the enemy is trying to hold, rather than simply out conquesting them via the application of a higher conquest value unit. There are some ways of helping with this situation, the Prime Warrior and the Contender being the prime examples as of right now, but we won't be able to challenge the hegemony, for example, in a straight conquest competition. We rather have to find different ways of securing objectives against foes like this. The last limitation that I feel I need to address is the fact that the Northern Tribes have extremely limited access to spell casting. The only spellcaster we have access to at the moment of recording of this video is the Evoker. So if we want somebody to block spells with, if we want someone to provide some arcane support for us, if we want someone to get the bonus dice in the Rift feat, if that's in play, then we have only one place to go to, and that's our Evoker. Luckily enough, the rules update 1.5 made fielding the Evoker way more reasonable, way more realistic. So in this regard, I don't consider this to be so much a weakness as it is a limitation on how many options we have available. And this leads us nicely to how I would characterize the identity of the Northern Tribes faction on the tabletop, and that is that they are a pack of hunters. What I mean by this is that as many of the Northern Tribes' tactical elements are quite self-sufficient and capable of independent action, it feels like you have a group of hunters who attack, drive, and control the prey from various angles and seek to run it down and then finish it off. This also means this style of play can also mean that the Northern Tribes company isn't as brittle as some of the other forces out there might be, since even if some tactical element, some unit gets defeated or even wiped off the table, that doesn't necessarily mean that the other tactical elements are all that much worse off due to this. This isn't a clockwork machine. This is a group effort that, yes, needs everyone, but if somebody gets the short straw and their job is to keep the enemy occupied and sell their lives dearly, then that's totally fine. The other parts of the faction or the company rather can usually get the job done. All this means that I think that the Northern Tribes are not half bad a faction for beginners, since this high independency and lessened brittleness of the company can make them somewhat more forgiving to play than some other factions might be, for example. I feel that when I play a victorious game with the Northern Tribes, I get to hound my enemies with attacks from all angles throughout the game, and I'm able to apply constant pressure, which means that my opponent might be more inclined to react to what I'm doing rather than getting to execute their own game plan to the best of what they had prepared for. And the Northern Tribes Company can push through most of the casualties that the enemy inflicts upon them as long as the company has been built right and their game plan is solid enough. And at the same time, the access to, for example, the aforementioned excellent scouts and ambushers means that unlike a traditional horde type army in many games, the Northern Tribes are extremely hard to trick, to ambush, to run rings around, and usually it's actually the Northern Tribes who are ambushing and running rings around their enemies. So that's a pretty great feeling to have. All right. As a last thing for today, I thought it might be fun for me to prepare a potential beginner list for the Northern Tribes for any new players to looking to dip their feet into the faction. So I have built a list that would be as easy and cheap as possible to collect, and that from my experience, should be decently playable on the gaming table also. So this is a full 250 point army list that clocks in at 6 command tokens, which is pretty good a number for a Northern Tribes warband. The basis of this list is formed by the wins from the north, starter boxes, Northern Tribes half. The famous Wrathmane Alborg will be leading our force, providing it with some strong fighting prowess, 3 command tokens, the War Alliance ability that allows us to mix and match Orc and Varang units and characters together, and also the powerful command ability, the Warg and the Grow, that can give us access to extra activations each round. Alborg can comfortably be run solo if the situation so dictates, but I have chosen to place him in a unit for safety in this instance. The Evoker is here to provide some magical support for our forces, an additional command token for our use, and her Delegate of the Ancestors ability can be used to reduce stress and or rally demoralized Orc units if that becomes necessary as the battle matures. Next, I have included both units from the Beyond the Winds from the North box. In this case, Njord the Merciless will take command of our Orc Hunters thanks to the War Alliance. He will provide the unit with extra willpower and morale and some automatic symbols on both offense and the defense. And now with the 1.5 rules update, Merciless's ability to inflict frightened upon the enemy has become more powerful. And Berserker Rage, I feel, has become more important since passing willpower tests, especially with two successes required sometimes is even more important than ever, and Berserker Rage can not only be used for attack and defense roles but also for willpower roles. Njord can also charge out of the unit if that ever becomes necessary or a good idea, and in a way one can even think of the orc hunters as a meat wall around Njord, whose main job in some instances may be simply to escort Njord to the front line so that he can charge out and do his thing. The skin changers can likewise provide bodyguards for Aalborg. They really enjoy an officer joining the unit, and Aalborg gives them a really important automatic block on their defense, so that's not half bad a combination in and of itself either. But if you choose to, for example, use the skin changers alone to scout, that's perfectly fine also. The last units are two purchases beyond the starter products. That is the Dark Master, who is I feel a almost must-have piece in many Northern Tribes lists. His sharp perception ability protects your force from nasty surprises by enemy scouts and ambushers, which is extremely handy, and he is a powerful assassin, tempo piece, and a scenario play piece in and of himself also. Lastly, I really love the Tantra Marauders, especially past the rules update 1.5, and since we have a wise main left over from the original Winds from the North box, we can now add him to the unit for some extra performance. So now we have some frontline presence, some powerful characters, some shock infantry, skirmishers, some magical support, and a deadly assassin by our side. So all in all, I think this is a fairly nice starter force for people to try out. Obviously, I don't think there is a right or a wrong way of building your company. This is just a simple example that one might use. And with that, today's introduction lesson is complete. The North awaits you, fellow travelers. Are you ready? Hope to see you again soon. Goodbye for now.